Okay, hi guys, welcome back to the next part of Matilda by Roald Dahl. The next one's called The Hat and the Superglue, and I'm hoping to read the next two chapters, maybe the next three, but we'll see how much time we've got for that one. I hope you enjoy this one. This is all Roald Dahl's own work, of course. I'm just reading it for pleasure and entertainment purposes. So without shadow of doubt, let's get going. The Hat and the Superglue. The following morning, just before the father left for his beastly second-hand car garage, Matilda slipped into the cloakroom and got hold of the hat he wore each day to work. She had to stand on her toes and reach up as high as she could with a walking stick in order to hook the hat off of the peg. And even then, she only just made it. The hat itself was one of those flat-topped pork pie jobs with jay feather stuck in the hat band, and Mr. Wormwood was very proud of it. He thought it gave him a rakish, daring look, especially when he wore it at an angle with his loud checked jacket and green tie. Matilda, holding the hat in one hand and the thin tube of superglue in the other, proceeded to squeeze a line of glue very neatly all around the inside of the rim of the hat. Then she carefully hooked the hat back to the peg with the walking stick. She timed this operation very carefully, applying the glue just as her father was getting up from the breakfast table. Mr. Wormwood didn't notice anything when he put the hat on, but when he arrived at the garage he couldn't get it off. Superglue is very powerful stuff, so powerful it will take your skin off if you pull too hard. Mr. Wormwood didn't want to be scalped, so he had to keep the hat on his head the whole day long, even when putting sawdust in gearboxes and fiddling the mileages of cars with electric drill. In an effort to save face, he adopted a casual attitude, hoping that his staff would think that he actually meant to keep his hat on all day, just for the heck of it, like gangsters do in the films. When he got home that evening, he still couldn't get the hat off. "Don't be silly," his wife said. "Come here, I'll take it off for you." She gave the hat a sharp yank. Mr. Wormwood let out a yell that rattled the window panes. "Ow! Ow!" he screamed. "Don't do that! Let go! You'll take half the skin off my forehead." Matilda's nestling in her usual chair, was watching this performance over the rim of her book with some interest. "What's the matter, Daddy?" she said. "Has your head suddenly swollen or something?" The father glared at his daughter with a deep suspicion, but said nothing. How could he? Mrs. Wormwood said to him. "It must be superglue. It couldn't be anything else. That'll teach you to go playing around with nasty stuff like that. I expect you were trying to stick another feather in your hat." "I haven't touched the flaming stuff," Mr. Wormwood shouted. He turned and looked again at Matilda, who looked back at him with large, innocent brown eyes. Mrs. Wormwood said to him, "You should read the label on the tube before you start messing with dangerous products. Always follow the instructions on the label." "What in heaven's name are you talking about, you stupid witch?" Mr. Wormwood shouted, clutching the brim of his hat to stop anyone trying to pull it off again. "Do you think I'm so stupid I'd superglue this thing to my head on purpose?" Matilda said, "There's a boy down the road who got some superglue on his finger without knowing it, and then he put his finger to his nose." Mr. Wormwood jumped. "What happened to him?" he spluttered. "The finger got stuck inside his nose," Matilda said, "and he had to go around like that for a week. People kept saying to him, 'Stop picking your nose,' and he couldn't do anything about it. He looked an awful fool." "Serve him right," Mrs. Wormwood said. "He shouldn't have put his finger up there in the first place. It's a nasty habit. If all children had superglue put on their fingers, they'd soon stop doing it." Matilda said, "Grown-ups do it too, Mummy. I saw you doing it yesterday in the kitchen." "That's quite enough from you," Mrs. Wormwood said, turning pink. Mr. Wormwood had to keep his hat on all through supper in front of the television. He looked ridiculous, and he stayed very silent. When he went up to bed, he tried again to get the thing off, and so did his wife, but it wouldn't budge. "How am I going to get in the shower?" he demanded. "You'll have to just do without it, won't you?" his wife told him, and later on, as she watched her skinny little husband skulking around the bedroom in his purple striped pajamas with pork pie hat on his head. She thought how stupid he looked. Hardly the kind of man a wife dreams about, she told herself. Mr. Wormwood discovered that the worst thing about having a peppermint hat on his head was having. Try that again, I'm really sorry, that's not peppermint. Just read too fast. So try again. Mr. Wormwood discovered that the worst thing about having a permanent hat on his head was having to sleep in it. It was impossible to lie comfortably on the pillow. Now do stop fussing around, his wife said to him after he had been tossing and turning for about an hour. I expect he'll be loose by the morning, and then it will slip off easily. But it wasn't loose by the morning, and it wouldn't slip off. So Mrs. Wormwood took a pair of scissors and cut the thing off his head, bit by bit, first the top and then the brim. Where the inner band had stuck to his hair around the sides and back, she had to chop the hair off right to the skin so that he finished up with a bold white ring round his head, like some sort of monk. And in the front, where the band had stuck directly to the bare skin, there remained a whole lot of small patches of brown leathery stuff that no amount of washing would get off. At breakfast, Matilda said to him, You must try to get those bits off your forehead, Daddy. It looks as though you've got little brown insects crawling about all over you. People will think you've got lice. Be quiet, the father snapped. Just keep your nasty little mouth shut, will you? All in all, it was the most satisfactory exercise, but it was surely too much to hope that it had taught the father a permanent lesson. Next chapter, The Ghost. There was a comparative calm in the Wormwood household for about a week after the Superglue episode. The experience had completely chastened Mr. Wormwood, and he seemed temporarily to have lost his taste for boasting and bullying. Then suddenly he struck again. Perhaps he had had a bad day at the garage and had not sold enough crummy second-hand cars. There are many things that make a man irritable when he arrives home from work in the evening, and a sensible wife will usually notice the storm signals and will leave him alone until he simmers down. When Mr. Wormwood arrived back from the garage that evening, his face was as dark as a thundercloud, and somebody was clearly for the high jump pretty soon. His wife recognised the signs immediately and made herself scarce. He then strode into the living room. Matilda happened to be curled up in an armchair in the corner, totally absorbed in a book. Mr. Wormwood switched on the television. The screen lit up. The programme blared. Mr. Wormwood glared at Matilda. She hadn't moved. She had somehow trained herself by now to block her ears to the ghastly sound of the dreaded box. She kept right on reading, and for some reason this infuriated the father. Perhaps his anger was intensified because he saw her getting pleasure from something that was beyond his reach. Don't you ever stop reading, he snapped at her. Oh, hello, Daddy, she said pleasantly. Did you have a good day? What is this trash, he said, snatching the book from her hands. It isn't trash, Daddy, it's lovely. It's called The Red Pony. It's by John Steinbeck, an American writer. Why don't you try it? You'll love it. Filth, Mr. Wormwood said. If it's by an American, it's certain to be filth. That's all they write about. No, Daddy, it's beautiful. Honestly, it is. It's about. I don't want to know what it's about, Mr. Wormwood barked. I'm fed up with your reading anyway. Go and find yourself something useful to do. With the frightening suddenness, he now began to ripping the pages out of the book in handfuls and throwing them in the wastepaper basket. Matilda froze in horror. The father kept going. There seemed little doubt that the man felt some kind of jealousy. How dare she, he seemed to be saying with each rip of the page. How dare she enjoy reading books when he couldn't? How dare she? That's a library book, Matilda cried. It doesn't belong to me. I have to return it to Mrs. Phelps. Then you'll have to buy another one, won't you? The father said, still tearing out the pages. You'll have to save your money until it's enough in the kitty to buy a new one for your precious little Mrs. Phelps, won't you? With that, he dropped the now empty covers of the book into the basket and marched out of the room, leaving the telly blaring. Most children in Matilda's place would have burst into floods of tears. She didn't do this. She sat there very still and white and thoughtful. She seemed to know that neither crying nor sulking ever got anyone anywhere. The only sensible thing to do when you are attacked is, as Napoleon once said, to counterattack. Matilda's wonderfully subtle mind was already at work, devising yet another suitable punishment for the poisonous parent. The plan that was now beginning to hatch in her mind depended, however, upon whether or not Fred's parrot was really as good talker as Fred made out. Fred was a friend of Matilda's. He was a small boy of 6 who lived just around the corners from her, and for days he had been going on about this great talking parrot his father had given him. So the following afternoon, as soon as Mrs. Wormwood had departed in her cart for another session of bingo, Matilda set out for Fred's house to investigate. She knocked on his door and asked if he would be kind enough to show her the famous bird. Fred was delighted and led her up to his bedroom, where a truly magnificent blue and yellow parrot sat in a tall cage. "There it is," Fred said. "Its name is Chopper." "Make it talk," Matilda said. "You can't make it talk," Fred said. "You have to be patient. It will talk when it feels like it." They hung around waiting. Suddenly, the parrot said, "Hello, hello, hello." It was exactly like a human voice, Matilda. Matilda said, "That's amazing. What else can it say?" "Rattle my bones," the parrot said, giving a wonderful imitation of a spooky voice. "Rattle my bones." "He's always saying that," Fred told her. "What else can he say?" Matilda asked. "That's about it," Fred said. "But it's pretty marvellous, don't you think?" "It's fabulous," Matilda said. "Will you lend him to me just for one night?" "No," Fred said. "Certainly not." "I'll give you all my next week's pocket money," Matilda said. That was different. Fred thought about it for a few seconds. "All right, then," he said, "if you promise to return him tomorrow." Matilda staggered back to her own empty house, carrying a tall cage in both hands. There was a large fireplace in the dining room, and she now set about wedging the cage up the chimney and out of sight. This wasn't so easy, but she managed it in the end. "Hello, hello, hello," the bird called down to her. "Hello, hello." "Shut up, you nuts," Matilda said, and she went out to wash the soot off of her hands. That evening, while the mother, the father, the brother, and Matilda were having supper as usual in the living room in front of the television, a voice came loud and clear from the dining room across the hall. "Hello, hello, hello," it said. "Harry!" cried the mother-tongue voice. "There's someone in the house. I heard the voice." "So did I," the brother said. Matilda jumped up and switched off the telly. "Shh," she said. "Listen." They all stopped eating and sat there very tense. "Hello, hello, hello," came a voice again. "There it is," cried the brother. "It's burglars," hissed the mother. "They're in the dining room." I think they are," the father said, sitting tight. "Then go and catch them, Harry," hissed the mother. "Go out and collar them red-handed." The father didn't move. He seemed in no hurry to dash off and be a hero. His face had turned grey. "Get on with it," hissed the mother. "They're probably after the silver." The husband wiped his lips nervously with his napkin. "Why don't we all go and look together?" he said. "Come on then," the brother said. "Come on, Mum." "They're definitely in the dining room," Matilda whispered. "I'm sure they are." The mother grabbed a poker from the fireplace. The father took a golf club that was standing in the corner. The brother seized a table lamp, ripping the plug out of its sockets. Matilda took the knife she had been eating with, and all 4 of them crept towards the dining room door, the barber keeping well behind the others. "Hello, hello, hello," came the voice again. "Come on," Matilda cried. She burst into the room, brandishing her knife. "Stick 'em up," she yelled. "We've caught you." The others followed her, waving their weapons. Then they stopped. They stared around the room. There was no one here. "There's no one here," the father said, greatly relieved. "I heard him, Harry," the mother shrieked, still quaking. "I distinctly heard his voice. So did you." "I'm certain I heard him," cried Matilda. "He's in here somewhere." She began searching behind the sofa and behind the curtains. Then came the voice once again, soft and spooky this time. "Rattle my bones," it said. "Rattle my bones." They all jumped, including Matilda, who was a pretty good actress. They stared around the room. There was still no one there. "It's a ghost," Matilda said. Heaven help us! Cried the mother, clutching her husband round the neck. I know it's a ghost, Matilda said. I've heard it here before. This room is haunted. I thought you knew that. Save us! The mother screamed, almost throttling her husband. I'm getting out of here, the father said, greyer than ever now. They all fled, slamming the door behind them. The next afternoon, Matilda managed to get a rather sooty and grumpy parrot down from the chimney and out of the house without being seen. She carried it through the back door and ran with it all the way to Fred's house. Did it behave itself? Fred asked her. We had a lovely time with it, Matilda said. My parents adored it. Hey, this next chapter is quite short, so I think I'm going to have time for that. And maybe the next one, but we will give it a go. I doubt it'll be okay for the next two ones, but maybe the next just one. So I give it a go. Next chapter is called Arithmetic. Matilda longed for her parents to be good and loving and understanding and honourable and intelligent. The fact that they were none of these things was something she had put up with. It was not easy to do so, but the new game she had invented of punishing one or both of them each time they were beastly to her made her life more or less bearable. Being very small, very young, the only power Matilda had ever had over anyone in her family was brain power. For sheer cleverness, she could run things around them all, but the fact remained that any 5-year-old girl in any family was always obliged to do as she was told, however assassin the orders might be. Thus, she was always forced to eat her evening meals out of TV dinner trays in front of the dreaded box. She always had to stay alone on the weekday afternoons, and whenever she was told to shut up, she had to shut up. Her safety valve, the thing that prevented her from going round the bend, was the fun devising and the dishing out these splendid punishments, and the lovely thing was that they seemed to work at any rate for short periods. The father, in particular, became less cocky and unbearable for several days after receiving a dose of Matilda's magic medicine. The parrot in the chimney affair quite definitely cooled both parents down a lot, and for over a week. They were comparatively civil to their small daughter, but alas, this couldn't last. The next flare-up came one evening in the sitting-room. Mr. Wormwood had just returned from work. Matilda and her brother were sitting quietly on the sofa waiting for their mother to bring the TV dinners on a tray. The television had not yet been switched on. In came Mr. Wormwood in a loud check suit and a yellow tie. The appalling broad orange and green check of the jacket and trousers almost blinded the onlooker. He looked like a low-grade bookmaker, dressed for his daughter's wedding, and he was clearly very pleased with himself this evening. He sat down in an armchair and rubbed his hands together and addressed his son in a loud voice. Well, my boy, he said, your father's had a most successful day. He's a lot richer tonight than he was this morning. He has sold no less than 5 cars, each one at a tidy profit. Sawdust in the gearboxes, the electric drill on the speedometer cables, a splash of paint here and there, and a few other clever little tricks, and the idiots were all falling over themselves to buy. He fished a bit of paper from his pocket and studied it. Listen, boy, he said, addressing the son and ignoring Matilda. Seeing as you'll be going into business with me one day, you've got to know how to add up the profits you make at the end of each day. Go and get yourself a pad and a pencil, and let's see how clever you are. The son obediently left the room and returned with the writing materials. Write down these figures, the father said, reading from his bit of paper. Car number 1 was bought by me for £278 and sold for £1,425. Got that? The 10-year-old boy wrote the 2 separate accounts down slowly and carefully. Car number 2, the father went on, cost me £118 and sold for £760. Got it? Yes, Dad, the son said. I've got that. Car number 3 cost me £111 and sold for £999.50. Say that again, the son said. How much did it sell for? £999.50, the father said. And that, by the way, is another of my nifty little tricks to diddle the customer. Never ask for a big round figure, always go for just below it. Never say £1,000, always say £999.50. Sounds much less, but isn't it clever, isn't it? Very, said the son. You're brilliant, Dad. Car number 4 cost £86, a real wreck that was, and sold for £699.50. Not too fast, the son said, writing the numbers down. Right, I've got it. Car number 5 cost £637 and sold 1649.50. You got all those figures written down, son? Yes, Daddy, the boy said, crouching over his pad and carefully writing. Very well, the father said. Now work out the profit I made each of the 5 cars and add up the total. Then you'll be able to tell me how much money your rather brilliant father made altogether today. That's a lot of sums, the boy said. Of course it's a lot of sums, the father answered. But when you're a big business like I am, you've got to be old stuff at arithmetic. I've practically got a computer inside my head. It took me less than 10 minutes to work the whole thing out. You mean you did it in your head, Dad? The son asked, goggling. Well, not exactly, the father said. Nobody could do that. But it didn't take me long. When you're finished, tell me what you think my profit was for the day. I've got a final total written down here, and I'll tell you you're right, Matilda said quietly. Dad, you've made exactly £4,303.50 altogether. Don't butt in, the father said. Your brother and I are busy with high finance. But Dad, shut up, the father said. Stop guessing and trying to be clever. Don't look at your answer, Dad, Matilda said gently. If you've done it right, it ought to be £4,303.50. Is that what you've got, Dad? The father glanced down at the paper in his hands. He seemed to stiffen. He became very quiet. There was a silence. Then he said, Say that again. £4,303.50, Matilda said. There was another silence. The father's face was beginning to go dark red. I'm sure it's right, Matilda said. You little cheat, my father suddenly shouted, pointing at her with his finger. You looked at my bit of paper. You read it off from what I've got written here. Daddy, I'm on the other side of the room, Matilda said. How could I possibly see it? Don't give me that rubbish, the father shouted. Of course you looked. You must have looked. No one in the world could give the right answer just like that, especially a girl. You're a little cheat, madam, that's what you are. A cheat and a liar. At that point, the mother came in carrying a large tray on which were 4 suppers. This time it was fish and chips, which Mrs. Wormwood had picked up in the fish and chip shop on her way home from bingo. It seemed that bingo afternoons left her so exhausted both physically and emotionally that she never had enough energy left to cook an evening meal. So if it wasn't TV dinners, it had to be fish and chips. What are you looking so red in the face about, Harry? She said as she put the tray down on the coffee table. Your daughter's a cheat and a liar, the father said, taking his plate of fish and placing it on his knees. Turn the telly on and let's not have any more talk. Okay, I am going to leave it there. The next chapter is 10 pages. Although there are pictures in this book, I'd rather not rush read it because it's good fun reading these. So I'm going to leave it there. The next chapter will be called The Platinum Blonde Man. Probably could have read it in that time, but I don't want to rush it. So here we go. That is the next 3 chapters of Matilda. Thank you again for listening, guys. I hope you have enjoyed the books that I read so far. Do love a bit of Matilda. But thank you for your support and listening. Until the next time, guys. Bye!